NPC.
Let's rock!
When you depend on me,
To give you
weapons and
cyber information for your journey and still you
trying to hurt me.
Life's tough!
When you're an NPC.
Life's
Hello, and welcome back to another Critter Miss special. The time whenever we put away the RPG books and take a look at different aspects of role-playing game and tabletop gaming culture. In particular, for today's topic, we're going to be talking about something that I find is a little irritating, and that is the idea of party composition. I will lay my cards on the table right now and say that I am not a person who likes to find the most efficient ways to do things in role-playing. I often like the stories that are told in role-playing games and the systems that go with them. However, I am not one who is going to crunch the numbers and find the perfect combination to blow through enemies with the most efficient means imaginable. As such, this video may be a little skewed. With that said, on the topic at hand, party composition is a term that has always been in the world of role-playing games. However, it has truly taken off with the rise of the MMO and the competitive multiplayer type of games. The idea being that there is a perfect combination of various factors to offer you the most well-balanced team in order to take on various enemies. While some may differ, the most common one out there is the tank that is meant to soak damage and run in head first, distracting the creature from the rest of the team. Then you have your damage per second fighters, and these are the ones that deal the most damage to the creature. You finally have the healer, that's job it is to keep the entire party on their feet, in particular the tank, who's the one that's taking all the damage after all. There is variation, but most of them tend to stick to the same format, and typically include one tank, one healer, and a number of DPSs that range from about 2 to 5, let's say. While the concept of party comp has become a staple in the video game world, it wasn't always the case that the tank healer DPS combo was the norm for tabletop RPG world, until just recently. This might be hard to believe, but there was a time where this was not so stringent of a rule. I've now seen several games in which players will try to force other players to take on the role of barbarian or cleric or wizard just to ensure that the tank DPS healer combo is in effect even in the tabletop game as well as your video games. Tabletop RPGs finds itself in a strange inspiration coming from the source, which in turn gets inspiration from the person that inspired them. It is similar in the way that Tomb Raider and Uncharted are now in this never-ending loop of ripping each other off. Well, yes, the idea of party comp did come from the RPGs and the concept of tabletop games, since it had to come from somewhere, but it was never a major aspect of character creation and characters in a party until just recently with the creation of 5e, which has seen party composition almost become a staple. I mean, the funny thing about this is that RPGs really don't fit at all into party composition. I mean, D&D for certain, that's the one that actually you see the most of, but most RPGs out there seem to be a mismatch of different combinations and variations. And now you have an entire generation of gamers who are trying to institute the DPS healer tank combo into games that could not even possibly ever be a factor. D&D is the best fit, but we will get to that one in a second. Most gamers that I have met, until just recently, never worried about party composition in games like, let's say, Vampire the Masquerade or Shadowrun or so forth. But now I see people who are actually trying to force this, including games in which someone tried to force a player to play Clan Brujah just so they could have a quote-unquote tank in the group. And that is really bad whenever you're talking about a game that's combat rules were almost at the bottom of its list of priorities. I mean, whenever we're talking about World of Darkness, one of the worst parts about it, at least the classic version, was the fact that combat was so convoluted. And now you have an entire lineage of gamers who are trying to actually build around combat in certain games like World of Darkness, where combat was like 4th or 5th on the list of priorities for them. It really doesn't work out well. Party composition, as it stands, is in a weird realm of being both a myth as well as a necessity in the modern RPG gaming. How is that even possible? Well, let's first tackle why this is a myth, in particular using D&D as a basis, since D&D was the best fit for this. The idea of party composition is one that is nice, let's say, yet not necessarily needed. This is due to the fact that, unlike video games that have to remain within the parameters of what the game code dictates, the limits of D&D games are limited only to the DM's imagination. In a video game, the coding of the game makes it that a balanced team equates to a more likelihood of success. However, unless you mod the game, which can be a bit of cheating aspect for the competitive multiplayer, you can't expand past the parameters to make the game playable if you had nothing but a bunch of tanks or DPSs or healers. In D&D, the DM can easily manipulate foes, villains, scenes, just about anything to fit the player characters as needed. If the players have in their party, let's say, 1 cleric and 6 rogues, the DM can still manipulate their standing plan to ensure that most of their encounters can be won or fought via stealth. If the players are 1 bard with healing spells and 2 fighters, 1 paladin and 1 barbarian, then the DM can manipulate the game to make it a more rough and tumble sort of affair that is built more for heavy-hitting tank sort of entities. Really, party composition is nice, but it's not a necessity. I mean, the limits of a game is limited to the DM's imagination. So really, to force on party comp is basically to say that a DM really doesn't want to expand upon what they've already written. They don't want to actually work outside the box or the parameters of what they built. So party comp becomes sort of a necessity by the fact that DMs don't want to actually work outside of those parameters. But even then, after saying all of that, the idea of party comp is becoming more and more of necessity. And I think a lot of you can see where I'm going to go with this conversation, but let's get the spiel going. The other thing to understand about gaming is that gaming has a culture built around it by the things that we surround ourselves with. This culture evolves over time. There is a reason why old school gamers are much more likely to be killer DMs and don't see player characters as that important. They grew up on Gygax in the Tomb of Horrors. Their idea was a player versus DM mentality. As time passed, story became much more important, and D&D became less a game and more of a true role-playing experience where you craft your own story with the players as the protagonists. Even stories change. The 80s had no chill, which is why you saw science fiction mashed together with fantasy, and the ideas of spelljammer ships became so popular. Today is no exception. We are molded by our experiences in this world, and our game reflects that. Thanks to the fact that tabletop gamers and video gamers have such an overlap, you have players who are wired to understand that the way you play RPGs is to create a team composed of basic elements of party composition. The DM crafts a story that requires a tank, a healer, and a number of DPS characters in order to truly be successful, and finds it difficult to see past it whenever they do not go along with the plan. Although most players are more than happy to do so due to the fact that the culture and the mentality is built around them as well to have the tank-healer-DPS combination. And there you have it, the myth and reality of party composition. The myth of party composition is that games, tabletop games, are only constrained by a dungeon master, storyteller, game master's imagination. So, really, you don't need to have a party that's composed of a tank, a healer, and a couple of DPSs to be successful. You just have to make sure that your game is wired to fit whatever composition came out of character creation. However, the reality of it is the fact that when it comes to party composition, we are now wired in a culture and a society with video games and tabletop games where party composition has become much more of a norm, and it becomes much more of a cultural guideline for people to build games around. So you have video gamers crossing over to tabletop, or you have tabletop and video gamers who are always together, now seeing the tank, the healer, the DPSs doing their job, and instantly you start to equate that that is the way that you actually build a tabletop game as you build a video game. As such, I'm going to just about call it from there. We've talked about the myth and reality of party composition, and honestly, there's not really much more to say about that. It was a very quick look into the aspects of culture, as well as what it truly means to have a party composition and a party composition game and the myths and shortfalls of it. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more.